to go to Iraq. So I had to actually argue for the case to go to Iraq. Totally random. So at least in one class, there's definitely a conversation occurring.
I don't know about you, but when I first came back, I'd never had this interest before, but I majored in government and history because I was trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. And I went to these government classes. When I came home in 1968, I'd never seen a man with long hair. I was at a military college before I went into the Marines, and I'd just not been a part of the counterculture change in the 60s. It was very strange to come back to be such a different world. But in my government class, the guys with long hairs raised the most interesting questions. I thought they were all on drugs or something, you know. And
They were.
that wasn't well for that too. And so we had incredible conversations and dialogue in the class. I just like to see that happen for everybody. You know, if it's only the government classes, that may not be.
The first class that I took when I came back was the politics of intervention in Afghanistan. It was the very first class.
That was
I
a
took.
class, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It was taught by a recently approved, or I don't know what you say. He just defended his dissertation right now. Romain Marjek, who's a friend of mine now, a colleague, I would say. And he taught this class, and for like the first 3 or 4 weeks, I didn't tell anybody in the class that I had literally just came back from Afghanistan. And it was interesting to have that dynamic, but I'll tell you, once everybody found out, and there happened to be another veteran in the class who also didn't tell anybody, and then we found each other, we knew, you know? Once the rest of the class learned about that, they just latched on. They wanted to hear what was really going on, because it was the subject matter. So they were very interested, and so it significantly changed the discourse of the class.
Yes.
And the dynamic of the class. And I believe, you know, in the idea of the strategic asset of the veteran on the community. And that's a term I've stolen from Eli Williamson, and I'm not afraid to say that. So, because I think it's a brilliant statement. We are strategic assets. So having said that, so the last question, think about that. I mean, imagine really tapping into that strategic asset. Imagine the community benefiting from that experience, the Northwestern community, in 5 to 10 years, as the last question says. What do we look like? Where are we? What are we doing? What does the community at Northwestern look like internally, and how is it impacting our larger community? You know, you asked me, what is community? You know, and I've been trying to define that question for a couple of years now with my local community, with my veterans group. So maybe even define community.
I'll tell you what community looks like.
Yeah.
It looks like what this country looked like for about 3 days after 9/11.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everybody talked to everybody. There weren't walls between people. That's what community looks like.
So can we make that in 5 to 10 years? Is that what Northwestern looks like in terms?
I hope so.
Where these silos of the colleges, they don't want to, you know. By the way, if we could use the, if you could help us at the SCS school use the microwaves over at the Kellogg building. We're gonna break down barriers. Let's start right there. This is like Arafat and we'll shake hands and we'll break down those barriers. So sorry, I'll digress. So 5 to 10 years, where are we? Anybody, for that matter. Professor Rice.
You know, one of the odd things about Northwestern, which actually hurts some of the issues that have come up there, is the isolation of one school from another. We have the medical school on one site, we have the law school on one site. Kellogg students and the bulk of undergraduates are like oil and water. Many of the vets are in SCS, and I'm deliberately saying this in front of Virgie, who needs to hear this. Our undergraduates, I teach undergraduates and I teach in SCS, our undergraduates will not encounter a veteran in 4 years here because the veterans are not in undergraduate programs unless they get...
They're coming. Alex here has just joined us, and so they're on their way. We're getting ready for them right now.
And students may get them as TAs. Yes, sir. But I think it's incumbent on the university, including Kellogg, and I'm not ragging on you, but Kellogg is extremely aloof. Try eating down in the cafeteria when it's lunch. To say, you know, undergraduates here are part of the same community we are part of. And I think that, you know, to build this community, you know, to create a different sense in the world, you know, in our local world about what role veterans play. I mean, when I started teaching SES, I started meeting veterans, present company included, a couple of you here, and it was explosive. So, you know, it's not that you aren't trying, it's we don't give you this physical space. We're not giving you the physical space to make it happen. So maybe the associate provost for civic engagement, who's my good friend here, can try to help work with groups to break down some of these barriers. And I think veterans, you know, would be a great place to begin that process.
Yeah. Because we are horizontal throughout the organization or throughout the institution in a very unique way.
And something to teach.
Yeah. Anybody at 5 to 10 years? Where are we? Anybody on the? I know it's 5:30 right now, and we have the room until 6. And I want to be mindful of everybody's time and everything. But I think it's important that we at least put it out there on the table and have an idea of where we want to be in 5 to 10 years. Or maybe we just don't know. Maybe it's too soon. You know.
We want to be with
Am I
fewer
on the
barriers.
clock?
I'll say one thing, just as my parting comment. When I was doing my master's in 2008 and I entered the classroom, there was 3 other military veterans, and one was a lieutenant colonel, one was a major, and one was a captain. I was the only enlisted man in the room. And I'm beginning to see over the last 3 to 4 years what I see a shift where we're going to begin to see enlisted soldiers, Marines, airmen, and sailors entering the professional workforce. Today, I came from Orlando just a few weeks ago, where we had student veterans from all over the country come together, and I'm seeing MD students, JD students. We're seeing MBA students, and we're seeing formerly enlisted folks that are going into school into some of this nation's most premier university, whether it's Harvard, Columbia, and a few of my colleagues are all at some of those schools. So it is my belief that in 5 to 10 years, we're going to see these folks go into the corporate workforce, go into academia, go into government, and we're starting to see some of the early signs of that. A colleague of mine, Tammy Duckworth, she's in Congress, so is a few others, Iraq and Afghanistan, that came in through this wave. So I see in 5 to 10 years is going to be a new professional class that I would hope, with all the proper support, that are out there making a difference. And in 10 to 20 years, they're going to become CEOs. They're going to be entrepreneurial capitalists. They're going to be leaders in government, and they are going to be leaders in academia and in the not-for-profit space. If you see, there's specific individuals out there that are already making that difference. And I think in 5 to 10 years, they will all come back. If they're alums from Northwestern, they would come back to the Northwestern and see, I had a good time. I had a great transition here at Northwestern, and like all great academic institutions, then that's when they can make their sales pitch.
Yeah.
Well,
on that note,
the military is an unassailable good.
I want to thank everybody. One of our panelists has to go, and we definitely want to continue the conversation. So this conversation is not over as we speak.
Hold on.
Well, no, I just wanted to ask questions. So
I want to excuse Dr. Allen, and if anybody wants to stay and we could take questions, I know you have to go, and I want to thank you for your time. And certainly if our other panelists want to stay and take some questions, we can do that. But again, Doctor, thank you so much for your participation and your contribution. Please.
So there are a number of things that, there are a bunch of questions, and one of the questions is directed to him, he's leaving. But, one of the questions I have is about the transition that you all spoke about and the kind of reentry, and you talked about the loading the plane, and how do you adjust kind of folks who have that military experience and that the self-sacrificing kind of approach to a culture that is, one, either less self-sacrificing. I say college is actually one of the most selfish times. It's one of the few times that a student has the opportunity to say, I want to study this. I'm, my whole rest of my life is a have to, but this is what I want to do. And where we value strategizing and thinking as opposed to work. And that is the life of the mind. And so how do you mesh the culture that someone comes out of a military environment with the culture of the university? And where should the give be? Is it on the part of the veteran coming into the university culture, or is the university adjusting to folks coming in with a different framework?
The latter.
Let me just, a little bit, and some of you knocked on Kellogg a little bit, so let me just, let me have a rebuttal here. One of the things that, one of the main reasons maybe that veterans like Kellogg, and Kellogg like veterans, is that Kellogg values group work and collaboration more than any other business school.
Yeah.
So veterans actually mesh nicely into that because that's what they have done in the last few years.
Yeah.
So group work more than any other business school, and it seems more than in Northwestern. And that is highly valued, and I think that's one thing. And again, the business school, the business world